but I'll say now, I don't know why. I can't explain it, but I'll just I'll review two books very briefly that suggest answers. Firstly, to the evidence. How to prove elite hostility? Well, I suppose one could go in the newspapers and media and universities and look for hateful comments. You could look for smoking gun. One could look for statements such as this: the white race is the cancer of history. I mean, you couldn't get less ambiguous than that. There's statements of sheer hatred. By the way, she later recanted. I have to be fair to her. She later recanted and she said, I was being unfair to cancer. That was a recantation. Cancer's not as bad as that. But look, I think this is a valid approach, adding up praise and spite in various forums, various media. That would be relevant. Very difficult to say anything conclusive about it, because it's so easy to cherry pick quotes, ignore some, so you need a random sample of quotes. How would you go about that? It's very, very difficult. What I'll do tonight is adopt a more direct and fundamental approach, which is to look at policy outcomes. Within a particular theoretical frame. So that's why I don't believe this will be a proof, but I hope it'll be interesting. And the theoretical frame is evolutionary biology, because I'm a political scientist, trained at Sydney University and elsewhere in Australia. But what is different about my approach is that I treat humans as an evolved species. So we're different to other species, of course, but we are of them. We're of nature. We came from nature. We evolved. And from that perspective, what I like about it is that it keeps things concrete. That approach deals with the most basic interests we have: interest in survival, in life, in reproduction, in status, individual and group status. It's really biological concepts. And from that theoretical perspective, looking at policy outcomes, I have used this cliche, the 800-pound gorilla, so 395-kilogram gorilla in the room. Oh, right, it's difficult. Is that better? The 800-pound gorilla in the room is the replacement, the wholesale replacement, the rapid replacement of Western populations and them being driven to minority status in the not too distant future by immigration policies allied with multicultural policies. And what I like about that as a measure of one cannot think of much more that would be maladaptive than outright killing. So driving a population of any species, driving its relative numbers down, and what counts in Darwinian evolution is relative fitness. It's not absolute numbers, it's relative fitness. Driving it down is a hostile act. It can be easily seen as hostile. America will be minority white. The American nation will be reduced to minority status in about a quarter of a century, current predictions, and demography is the most precise of the social sciences. Australia is heading in the same direction, belatedly. Britain is heading in the same direction, Holland, and so on. So, from that, standing back as if we're Martians coming down to Earth and we're looking at humans as an evolved species, we see this happening. The natural question is, why? Well, it certainly didn't come from the people. This is not a bottom-up demand. Please, we want to be diversified and replaced in our historic territories. This is an act by elites. So, I take that as strong, not conclusive, but strong evidence of hostility. But I can go to one concrete example. Now, Greg Sheridan is, I think he's seen as a conservative journalist, certainly a senior journalist in the Murdoch Empire, on the flagship newspaper, The Australian, and Mr. Sheridan has been a long-standing supporter of diversifying Australia. He's been a very strong advocate of that. And he just recently came out with an article where he said Anglo-Australia's racial and ethnic identity has been supplanted by immigration. I think he's being just descriptive there. It's been rapidly supplanted, replaced, displaced. Australia has been completely transformed. I don't think that's accurate, but I think he's hoping a bit. Yes, it has been transformed, but not completely. But Anglo-Australia is gone forever. I think he's being a bit hopeful. What I'm trying to indicate is his hostility, not the reality of what he's saying. And then he came out with this extraordinary statement: Australia has undergone a benign cultural genocide. Is that an oxymoron? Benign genocide? So when late colonial Australians, inspired by social Darwinism, thought that the best outcome for Aboriginal Australians was, for them to sort of shuffle off this mortal coil, sort of disappear, would they have used the word benign genocide? I don't even think they would have used the term benign genocide. But here we have it. And he's not alone. He's not alone. One doesn't have to go far to find this loving leader that we have, this man who cared deeply for us, who wrote Anglo-Saxon Australia is dead. Well, I mean, he might mean that descriptively, but can you imagine a multiculturalist such as this saying that about any other people? For example, any immigrant group that comes in and would some decades after the flow stops, will assimilate. In a way, it will disappear. One could say the original Greek immigrants are not really Greek anymore. One could say Greek Australia is dead. One could say, Italian Australia is dead because they're assimilating and so on. But no one would be so rude, certainly not a sensitive, high-minded multiculturalist like Mr. Malcolm Fraser. But when it comes to Anglo-Australia, he stated that as a moral imperative. Anglo-Australia is dead, and he's putting his stake in the heart. That's the mood in which he intended it. Okay, so now I'll shift from the macro to the micro, and I'll discuss education, because what Mr. Sheridan alleged was cultural genocide. Of course he didn't mean people being killed, he meant cultural identity, understanding of history, of place in the world, culture, cultural values, cultural... And that term is actually acknowledged by the United Nations. A couple of points on education, and then I'll move to causes. A conservative free market think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs, came out, I think last week. They've done a content analysis of, I think, 800 school curricula in English. They chose one discipline, English. And they found the classics have been largely abandoned. The examples used are often advertising texts when the children are introduced to texts to analyse. The three priorities are Indigenous culture, Asian culture and perspectives, and green politics, sustainability. This is English. This is not geography or history. This is English. So the education has been a cultural battleground for a long time, and it's flopped various ways, and this goes back. Charles Darwin delayed publishing his tome because of his really well-founded fear that he would be persecuted. At that stage, the upper hand was held by religious authority. So things change. I'm not suggesting that it's always going in the same direction, but for the time being, we have, I think, the upper hand is held by those who show some hostility towards the nation, our culture, anyway. And to finish that is my own personal observation of primary school assembly that I attended last week to watch my son, my 7-year-old son, perform on stage. And I'll just run you through what happened. And each item of what I'm saying is unexceptional. Is as unexceptional, perhaps the last one is. But put together it forms a strong pattern that confirms the IPA's report. The meeting opened with a little girl in my son's class acknowledging country. It wasn't a welcome to country, it was an acknowledgement of country, which I find quite appropriate. It was a component of my own acknowledgement, quite appropriate. But only one people were acknowledged. The nation, our pioneers, our founders, ignored. Ignored. Our religion, ignored. As the parents sat and as the children trooped in their class groups into the hall, some nice melodious background music came up. John Lennon's dystopian Imagine. Now, one might agree or disagree, but this is a public school. This is not a private atheist school. John Lennon described Imagine as the Communist Manifesto put to music. That's what he called it. And it is. So the message is, wouldn't it be wonderful if the world had no religion, no countries, no nations, no borders, and no property, of course, and no property. So then, at this stage, I began looking around the hall for some hint that I was in a Western country. Even though we're situated in Southeast Asia, we're a Western society. So I began looking around. There was no religious insignia, nothing. But I found a flag. A flag, right at the front, prominently displayed at the front, the Aboriginal flag. Not mine this time.
Don't worry.
The Aboriginal flag, fine, by the way. I think it's a striking flag, but there was not the national flag. There was no national flag. So I think that there's a strong pattern developing. Now, I'm going to discuss causes. I'll be suggesting causes. And the first I'll go to...
Excuse me, this will go on for a few minutes. I think it's the vision bell. Can it stop? Maybe you should stop for a couple of minutes unless you want all this happening while you speak.
I'll see if I can plough on. I'll try and plough on.
This is an occupational hazard. We're in Parliament House, and this doesn't mean that they want us to rack off. It simply means that this is what they do for a living.
I'll try. Maybe I should do something else to amuse.
Might be a gremlin playing a piano.
David Brown is a political scientist. When he wrote this book about 10 years ago, he was at Murdoch University, and his just some points to draw from this, and then I'll discuss. In Australia, the majority, he comments, is variously called white, British, and Anglo-Celtic. So majority has an ethnic designation. The multicultural state licenses minority ethnicity, but not majority. So there's a clear asymmetry there. There's a clear asymmetry. So before that, there was another asymmetry. The state licensed majority ethnicity. So it licensed the historic nation, the historic Anglo nation, but not minorities. Minorities were welcome as individuals, but not their corporate identities. No, that's obvious. We were Australia was an assimilationist state, assimilationist society, until it began to soften gradually from the 1970s through. But now, multiculturalism is in full flush, and it licenses, which means it approves, supports, applauds minority ethnicity, but not majority. It does the opposite with majority ethnicity. That's called, it's treated with political correctness. Multiculturalism states sometimes subordinate the majority. That's precisely what he says. Sometimes it goes further than that. Multicultural states actually suppress, push down the majority and subordinate them. I think that's an understatement. when I compare multicultural societies in Asia, for example, Malaysia is a multicultural state before Australia was, when you compare that with Western multiculturalism, every Western multicultural form of multiculturalism is in effect an ethnic hierarchy. It's an ethnic hierarchy in which majority ethnic expressions are discouraged and minority ones are encouraged. So I think he's underestimated that. Now the second book I'll just go to, make this quick. This is, for me, a master text. So I find this a far weightier text than David Brown's, although David Brown's is the case study on Australia. Eric Kaufmann's is a case study of the rise of Anglo-America. It's a case study on America, going back about 150 years. So it's the rise and fall of Anglo-America. By that he means white Protestants. White Protestants. And his thesis is, it's a Harvard University Press book, about 10 years old. It's in the mainstream. It's not challenged by mainstream theorists in sociology. He himself teaches in sociology and political science at London University. And I'll just run you quickly through his thesis. Cosmopolitanism, left radical, post-ethnic, very important point. It's not an ethnic phenomenon. This was not an ethnic war or conflict in some way, the fall of Anglo-America. This was a post-ethnic, secular, radical movement he calls cosmopolitanism. And it took over elite culture in the United States, beginning, very small beginnings in the late 19th century and concluding around 1950. In anthropology, cultural anthropology, it had happened by 1940. And with the discipline of history, sometime in the 40s. So different disciplines in the academy were basically captured by the left during this period, about mid-century. And he sees the student uprisings of the 1960s as sort of the equivalent of sneezing when you have a cold. Of course, the virus is caught far before that. I'm giving away my negative take on this. So what he puts forward is a Gramscian model of cultural warfare. Gramsci was an Italian communist, very bright communist who was imprisoned by I think by the fascist authorities. I think it was the fascist regime at that stage. And he argued, look, he said, armed communist revolutions will fail. What you need to do is take over the head, not the body, but the head of the society. You need to take over the institutions of cultural production and distribution. That's the key term. The target, you've won the battle when you've taken over the institutions of cultural production and distribution, the education system, the education system, tertiary, secondary, and primary, but mainly the people who produce the curriculum. To repeat, Kaufmann's thesis is that this was not an ethnically motivated movement. This was idealistic, universalistic, individualistic, expressive individualism contributed to it in the post-war period. The sort of power that it gained is hegemonic power, not line power, not command power. It's not political power in that sense. It's hegemonic power. That is influencing the way people see themselves, their identity, how they position themselves in history and in the world. That's hegemonic power. Then he does something very interesting. It's as if he and David Brown have been talking, but I don't believe they're colleagues. He then, towards the end of the book, he says, the result of this has not only been multiculturalism, but asymmetric multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, where minorities are favoured and protected and promoted, and deals done with them. Immigration kept open for their co-ethnics. White racists, let's face it, which racist is not white in the multicultural lexicon, is kept down, so majority ethnic expression is suppressed, minority ethnic expression freed, if that's what they want. And he calls that asymmetric multiculturalism. And the only thing holding these people together is their hatred of the majority, or their competitiveness, to be more accurate, is their competitiveness with the majority. So multicultural politics is essentially a coalition politics in which the ethnic minorities, basically on the far right, I mean these are tribally minded, ethnically, racially minded people. You know, I suppose the left would normally call them the most far right bigots that you could get, but they're in alliance with the left against the majority ethnic group. So it's the unholiest of alliances that one could imagine. They've been made clients of elite leftist intellectuals against the majority. So that, I think, constitutes at least a hypothesis of how